Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. We believe in starting on time, so that's what we're doing. Hi, I'm Matthew Haggis. I'm the chair of Edinburgh's One City Trust, and it's kind of our lecture this evening as part of the Edinburgh Lecture Series. So I get the privilege of saying hello to you, telling you a few words about Edinburgh's One City Trust, and introducing Richard Holloway. So Edinburgh's One City Trust is essentially, it's a citywide civic partnership, stuff that I've been involved in for many years. But it really is. What we try and do is bring together the civic institutions, the city organizations, and the citizens to tackle social exclusion or to promote social inclusion. It was born over 10 years ago, slightly before that. Richard Holloway chaired a commission that was established by the then Lord Provost looking at social exclusion in the city. And one of their big ideas, of which they had many, but one of their big ideas that I became involved in was this idea of a community foundation to create a financial endowment in Edinburgh that would support the development of projects and initiatives and activities that would deal with the business of social exclusion and promote everyone's understanding of social inclusion across Edinburgh. So the One City Trust was set up with the kind of express intent to draw from the wealth and the goodwill and the positivity in the city and to stretch across from that into the needs of those in other parts of the city that are the same one city that is Edinburgh. And actually to create a financial endowment. So the other thing that we do is we give out grants to organizations that we believe are doing stuff that actually does something practical to tackle social exclusion. We've done, in recent months, we've funded things like Edinburgh's Food Bank, which is, some of you will know, has food banks across the country have become increasingly important in recent times. But we've also done things like support an allotment gardeners project that was bringing different elements of the community together to work in gardens around the city and to get people out and about and involved in kind of greening our already green city, but not in every corner, as I'm sure you know. We've also funded breakfast clubs for primary school children who sometimes are at risk of going to school without having had any breakfast and therefore not being able to learn properly. We've got involved with them. And going back in time a bit, you may remember the cow parade when various huge brightly coloured cows came into the city. Well, we were involved in promoting it and developing it, and indeed we were one of the beneficiaries of that in terms of those cows were auctioned off at the end and they made some money, which I'm very pleased to say went into the One City Endowment. And this year, we decided to support the Edinburgh Lecture Series because it always does a very good job of raising awareness of the stuff that matters to us as citizens in the city. And we particularly wanted to engage with you as an Edinburgh Lectures audience in thinking about that whole thing, about the nature of the divisions in our city and what we might do about it. And we thought, well, who better to invite to come and stimulate your thinking about that than the original chair of the commission, Richard Holloway. Those of you, some of you in the audience here, may be here because you kind of go to everything you see Richard Holloway's name on. I know that's true because I'm like that. Since he was rector at Old St Paul's and therefore kind of my vicar, I have enjoyed his presence. And I do tend to go to most of the things that he turns up and speaks at because we know that it's always going to be stimulating and interesting. So you don't need any introduction to him. So there may be some people in the room who've not heard Richard speak. So first of all, I'll say you're in for a treat. Stand by your beds. But I'll also say something like Google him when you get home to find out the many things that he's been involved in since he was a vicar or whatever. He was rector of Old St Paul's, that's what he was known as. Broadcaster, author, a bishop at some point, those sorts of things. But very definitely a kind of broadly based person And on that basis, I kind of think, and you never know how he's going to talk about any particular subject. So we knew we were kind of taking our lives in our hands when we invite him to speak. But we knew it would be stimulating, and I'm sure it will. Richard Holloway.
Thank you very much, Matthew, for that. I remember him as a boy. There are no visual aids. I don't do PowerPoint. I'm the only visual aid you'll get, so you better shut your eyes, I suppose. My father was born in 1904, and at the end of the Great War, when he was 14, he started serving his time as an apprentice block printer at the famous United Turkey Red factory on the banks of the River Leven in Alexandria. Block printers were the elite in the textile factories that ran along that swift-flowing river. And I've been told that they had the right to wear bowler hats to work as a symbol of their status at the top of the journeyman tree. But while he was still a young man, changes in technology rendered his trade obsolete. And for the rest of his life, he worked as a laborer. He carried coal for a while, and I've often wondered how he managed it because he was a small man, under 8 stone, so he must have carried his own weight hour after hour up tenement stairs to keep bread on our table. And when World War II came along, he was re-employed by the UTR, helping to dye cloth. And when he was again made redundant from that at the age of 60, he ended his days working as a porter in the Vale of Leven Hospital. He was a quiet man, the kind who endured without saying much about himself. But I often wondered how he felt about the way his life had played out. Then one day I discovered a clue. I was rummaging under the bed in the recess in the kitchen when I came across a heavy bundle wrapped in cloth. I pulled it out, opened it, and found 2 heavy lead mallets with short wooden handles. They were your daddy's mells when he was a tradesman, my mother told me, for the block printing. I was a heedless child, but something about those mells silenced and saddened me. Why had he kept them? I wondered. A sense of betrayal and disappointment clung to them, and I suspect it was from that moment I became aware of how time and change have always robbed the poor not only of their occupations, but of their pride and purpose as well. In the long flow of history, the buffeting of the poor seems to operate like a natural law as impersonal as gravity. Because we humans are a clever, revolutionary species who can't leave anything alone for long, we're constantly inventing new ways of doing things and just as constantly discarding those who mastered the old trades, the old ways of doing things, like my father with those 2 treasured mells. Now, this is a theme deeply embedded in Scottish literature, the sorrow of it caught by our best writers. At the end of Lewis Grassic Gibbon's novel Sunset Song, they go up Blaweary Brae to dedicate the memorial to the 4 Kinraddy men who fell in the Great War, and the minister preaches a short, powerful sermon. Here's a bit of it. With them, we may say there died a thing older than themselves. These were the last of the peasants, the last of the old Scots folk. A new generation comes up that will know them not except as a memory in a song. The last of the peasants, these 4 that you knew, took that with them to the darkness and the quietness of the places where they sleep. And the land changes. Their parks and their steadings are a desolation where the sheep are pastured. We are told that great machines come soon to till the land, and the great herds come to feed on it. The crofter has gone. The man with the house and the steading of his own, and the land closer to his heart than the flesh of his own body. Nothing, it has been said, is true, but change. Nothing abides. Nothing is true but change. Nothing abides. And when I read these words, I think of that wee bundle under my parents' bed in Random Street. And it's the same note we hear in Solly MacLean's great poem about the clearing and depopulating of the highlands and islands, Hallaig. I don't have the Gaelic for it, but here's the English he did himself. Time the deer is in the wood of Hallaig. The window is nailed and boarded through which I saw the west, and my love is at the burn of Hallaig. I will go down to Hallaig to the Sabbath of the dead, where the people are frequenting, every single generation gone, their laughter a mist in my ears, and their beauty a film on my heart. Tonight, I want us not only to think about the impact of constant change upon the poor, but to feel it. And I don't mean feel guilty. I hope we can let the ancient predicament of the poor touch us in a way that will motivate us not to guilt, but to imaginative action. And we might begin the meditation by running the movie in our minds. The people expelled from the land, crowding into the cities to service the new industries, yes, and the pride they discovered in learning to build ships and make steel and mine coal and print cloth. Their lives were hard, but they had the dignity of purpose and the pride of providing for their children. But since nothing is true but change, nothing abides, the industrial revolutions of the 20th century cast them aside like outworn tools. I don't want to be political this evening because I want to nudge your thinking in another direction. But it is worth reminding ourselves that while it is the poor who pay the price for these constant revolutions, it's the rich who gather the profits. Karl Marx did not think this was accidental. He claimed it was intrinsic to the system itself. These are his words. Pauperism forms a condition of capitalist production and of the capitalist development of wealth. It forms part of the incidental expenses of capitalist production. But capital usually knows how to transfer these from its own shoulders to those of the working class and the petty bourgeoisie. I remarked earlier that the impact of constant change on the poor seemed as neutral and relentless as gravity. Marx himself had an almost religious conviction that history would drive the process forward till the moment when the poor could take it no longer and they would rise up and smash the system that ground them down. Marx's conviction was always closer to theology than to politics, but in this country, history has gone in the opposite direction to the one he predicted, leaving the workless poor not in a state of revolutionary anger, but of self-destructive passivity. And while it's true that the way capitalism works is the major cause of their predicament, the paradox is that some of our own well-meant attempts to mitigate the damage may, in the long run, have made the situation of the poor worse. Maybe that's why we came up with a new label to capture our confusion at what happened next. In the old days, though the working poor were at the bottom of the system, they were still part of it. Tragically, the developments in the 20th century ejected them from the system itself. So we had to coin a phrase to describe the new reality. We called it social exclusion, from a Latin term that means to shut out or banish. because we now recognize that there are people in our midst who are no longer part of the complex and dynamic reality we call society. They live as exiles in our midst. And as I've hinted, while the direct cause were the industrial revolutions of the 20th century, two attempts to ameliorate the situation actually served to harden it into permanence. The first fateful decision was the invention of a welfare system intended to help those going through a hard time till they got back into work, that gradually morphed into a way of maintaining them in a state of permanent exclusion from the economic system itself. And that exclusion was made symbolic as well as geographical by the second response, the comprehensive urban redevelopment plans after World War II that swept the poor from their ancestral habitats in the center of our cities and relocated them to the edges without asking them whether they wanted to go. I was living in Gorbals in the 1960s when this process was getting into high gear, and I opposed it at the time. Rather than restoring and adapting the old stone tenements, they decided to flatten them, largely for symbolic reasons, and decant the poor into housing schemes miles away on the perimeter. At the beginning of this lecture, I asked you not to think about the situation of the poor in our country, but to feel it. Well, try to imagine your way into what that great organized banishment felt like to those who were told to pack up and go from the center to the edges of our cities. Symbolically, it conveyed a powerful message of that word again, exclusion, exile. Other cities did it too, including Edinburgh, though here the middle classes managed to fight off the worst depredations of the planners in that dishonest, terrible decade, the 60s, and preserve Scotland's capital as a place people still live in, including some of the poor, and don't just drive through and away somewhere else. Now, whether or not you buy my historical analysis of the situation we face, the fact is that Scotland, like the rest of the United Kingdom, is an unequal and divided country in which a significant proportion of the population is excluded from the benefits the rest of us enjoy. They don't live as long as the rest of us, and the lives they lead are characterized by alienation and all the ills associated with it. And the paradox is that it costs us billions of pounds a year to sustain them in their immiseration. Poverty is expensive. Yet we know that divided societies are bad for all who live in them, and not just the deprived. The three plagues of domestic violence, addiction, and bad mental and physical health are the classic marks of unequal societies. And they not only create immense unhappiness, they consume our resources unproductively. Billions go into it. All of that said, let me hasten to add that no one is complacent about the situation, certainly not the leaders of this city. They might have been puzzled about how best to tackle the problem, but our leaders have never been complacent about it. Baffled, worried, yes, complacent, never. That's why when Eric Milligan was Lord Provost, he appointed a commission to explore the extent of social exclusion and propose possible remedies, as Matthew has already reminded you. When we finished our work in 2000, we called our report One City, not because we thought it described Edinburgh, but because it was what we wanted it to become. What I want to do in the rest of this lecture is to reflect briefly on some of the things that have been achieved. Then I want to offer a snapshot of deprivation in this city today and why it should concern all of us. And in conclusion, I want to suggest a change of direction and how we might respond to the situation. A good way to think about the happy life all sane people seek is to see it as a balance between two different kinds of freedom, what we might describe as negative and positive freedom. Freedom from and freedom for. But it is negative freedom, freedom from, we should concentrate our public policies on. We should identify and remove all those barriers to the good life that stop people flourishing. Well, by this criterion, there has been enormous progress in Edinburgh and in the nation at large. The One City report identified particular communities whose freedom to be themselves was constantly hindered by prejudice or indifference. If you were once excluded because you were physically disabled or belonged to a sexual or racial minority, your life will have improved immeasurably in recent years because as a society we worked hard to remove those negative restraints. The City of Edinburgh has been in the forefront of that campaign, and it's now enshrined in our Council's policy to advance equality and human rights. Earlier, I quoted Grassic Gibbons lamenting that nothing was true but change can also give us cause for rejoicing as well as weeping. If I were a woman or a gay man or physically or mentally disabled or a member of a racial or religious minority, I would rather be alive in Edinburgh now than at any other time in its history. And for that, our gratitude should go to the politicians and social reformers who fought hard to change attitudes and challenge prejudices. As a result of their work, we are closer to being one city than at any other time in our history. And lest you forget, homosexual acts between consenting adults was not decriminalised in Scotland until 1980. And we only got there then because Robin Cook managed to get an amendment smuggled onto a Westminster health bill. So negative freedom, freedom from the weight of another's prejudice or organisational indifference, is an essential part of the good society, and we should be proud of how much we have achieved. By an act of Parliament, at a stroke, you can remove an artificial limitation on another's freedom to marry the woman of her choice, or to gain access to a theatre in her wheelchair, or to find employment without being discriminated against for the colour of her skin. All of these obstacles on the road to happiness for many have been removed. But a giant called poverty stands there still, blocking the way ahead for many more. But how do we free people from poverty? We can't do that by an act of Parliament or anti-discriminatory legislation. Indeed, watching the Westminster government make things worse by its crude and unintelligent attempts to make things better should warn us against all simple and quick solutions to such a complex and enduring problem. But before exploring it further, we should admit its extent, something the One City report boldly did in the year 2000, and which the Council in its poverty profile has now brought up to date. Say, we decided to give the poor of Edinburgh a day out this summer, all of them. We would need to commandeer Murrayfield, Easter Road and Tynecastle to accommodate all 105,000 of them, almost a quarter of our population. Though we know that in our most deprived areas, 33% of the population live below the poverty threshold. And the most tragic impact of all this is on the lives of children, 18,000 of whom live in low-income households in Edinburgh. And report after report tells us that poverty is the most powerful determinant of a child's future. And let me repeat the paradox again. Keeping children poor costs us all a fortune. The Child Poverty Action Group estimates that the additional cost to education, child protection, health, criminal justice, and other services as a result of child poverty in Edinburgh cost the taxpayer £156 million a year to keep children unhappy. Some years ago, we brought Camilla Batman Jelly, the founder of a kids' company in London, that wonderful, big, vibrant woman, to lecture at the Royal Society on the impact of child poverty on the criminal justice system. Everything she said was brilliant, but one thing was devastating. She said that the scandal of the way we respond to the troubles of poor children is that we only really cascade money into their lives when they offend. Then the sky's the limit. And it is. We can spend more than £200,000 a year to keep a child in secure accommodation, when a fraction of that spend, imaginatively focused, might have kept him out of trouble in the first place. It's imagination I want to turn to next. But before releasing some bees from my own bonnet, I want to acknowledge the imaginative early intervention work that is being done in Edinburgh through its Early Years Change Fund and the Arts and Creative Learning Team's free music provision in the city schools. Good things are being done. They're just not being done intensely enough. And I also want to acknowledge the honesty of the Council for making no attempt to cover up the inequalities and divisions that scar our wonderful city. And I'm grateful to the One City Trust for inviting me to muse aloud tonight on how we might respond to this scandal. Please bear with me now as I offer a very specific response to the plight of the poor in this city. What I want to suggest is that if we get into the lives of those poor children early enough and use our imaginations and our treasure to help them, we can build a reality around them that will prove to be stronger and more defining than the one that presently sentences them to failure and ill health and the revolving doors of the criminal justice system. What we should recognize is that our primary duty to children is not to prepare them for the vagaries of the job market, but to equip them to lead abundant and fulfilling lives, no matter what the market may have in store for them. And if the scientists at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology are right, we are on the cusp of a revolution in production and services that will make previous industrial revolutions look like a walk in the park. We should prepare our children not for the market, but for life, and dealing with the relentless callousness of the way the market often works. And we're not doing that. That's the emerging world we need to strengthen our children to deal with. But before offering one way forward, I want to take another look at that word poverty. I want to use it both in an economic and spiritual sense, while noting that the former does not necessarily imply the latter. It is possible to be economically poor and spiritually and culturally rich. Many unemployed communities in the Hungry 30s, though they were economically poor, were culturally and certainly morally very rich. There was a strong self-improvement dynamic among working people who used public libraries to educate themselves and produce working-class intellectuals like Jimmy Reed. They often had a strong musical tradition, such as the brass bands in the Fife mining communities that produced musicians of genius such as John Wallace, now principal at the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland. The tragedy of our deprived communities today is that they are excluded not only from the job market, but from the riches of our cultural inheritance. So they're radically poor in both senses of the word. And that's what I think we can change if we're daring enough. In a lecture on cultural policy I gave at the University of the Highlands and Islands a few years ago, I said that the great killer in the communities of the socially excluded was empty time. Time is a problem for any human who doesn't know what to do with it, because unlike the other animals, we're not really content to sleep 80% of the day, which my wee dog does. I can't do that. The very language we use to talk about it points to the danger it poses for those who lack the resources to use it well. passing time, killing time. Sudokus, golf, those are pointless ways of killing time, but some people find them useful. Spending time, doing time, redeeming time are all phrases that capture the problem of rational animals with time on their hands and no hunting or gathering or laboring with which to fill it. What we did, we humans, as we gradually evolved in the childhood of our species, was to play. We doodled on cave walls. We told ourselves stories. We whittled designs on spears. We drummed and sang and invented musical instruments. And in filling time in all those ways, we created human culture. And from that rich complexity, civilization flowed. And it started in play. Play is the engine of our intellectual and cultural evolution. And the tragedy of our day is that in too many places that process has gone into reverse, and we've whole populations sitting around like characters in a Beckett play waiting for something to happen because they no longer know how to play creatively. We've created a new class without the ability to use well the one thing which they have been, with which they've been liberally endowed, empty time. It's the weight and burden of empty time that lead to the destructive lifestyles that are such a feature of life in these communities. That, I think, is the essence of Scotland's biggest social problem. We have sentenced people to lifetimes of empty time, but with no skill to use it well. And the challenge is to realize that these excluded areas are unlikely to be turned around anytime soon if we go on using the current repertoire of short-time tactics mainly based on work processes. A wiser approach would be to accept the economic emptiness of these areas and work to equip the children to fight their own way out of it and thereby grow a different future for themselves. The poorer a community is, the more cultural and creative resources we should pour into it. Pretty much the opposite of what happens at the moment. Which brings me to the bee in my bonnet, Systema Scotland, the movement founded 7 years ago that is now well on the way to transforming the communities in Raploch and Govan Hill and will start work next year in Torry and Aberdeen. Following the model invented by a Venezuelan genius nearly 40 years ago, we get children playing again by placing them in orchestras that take a stronger hold on their lives than the surrounding community that would otherwise imprint them with its own pattern of emptiness and despair. We don't argue about social policy or unemployment or drugs or neglect, though we confront these realities every day. What we do is to get the community making music, thereby flooding it with beauty and purpose and hard work. This does a number of things. First of all, and mainly, it's time-consuming. If empty time is the problem, then bloody well fill it. Systema fills time cooperatively, joyfully, and with discipline. We work these children hard, not as hard as they do in Venezuela, but harder than most other musical initiatives anywhere in Britain. The system, which is intense and immersive, happens every day, as well as during school holidays. And it gives the community back pride. Parents love their kids, no matter how out of it they themselves may be. And to see them succeeding encourages them to change as well. The young musicians of Raploch played alongside the famous Simon Bolivar Orchestra to a world audience in June last year at the beginning of the Cultural Olympiad in a wet field in Stirling. And the community has been bursting with pride ever since. We took the Raploch Symphony Orchestra to Caracas in January this year, and those 52 children, ranging in age from 9 to 15, broke the hearts of the 1,000 Venezuelans who turned out to hear them. And it's also worth pointing out here that 13 children from Raploch, now play in the National Youth Orchestra of Scotland and 13 in the National Youth Choir of Scotland, more than from any other single postcode in the country. And this is Raploch. No wonder Cosler recently gave Stirling its Gold Award for Excellence for what's going on in that once despised and beleaguered community. Even more extraordinary is the fact that Raploch is now on the short list, wait for it, for the Royal Town Planning Association's competition for the best place to live in Scotland. All of this achieved in 6 years. Now, I know there are many interesting music initiatives in Scotland, but this is different. There's nothing like this. This is not a cultural initiative that improves the lives of individuals and leaves their neighbourhood largely unchanged. It is a revolutionary way of achieving social transformation in whole communities that impacts on health, education, crime, and all the other areas that cost us so much when things go wrong, as they are going wrong at the moment. To flood an area with music and convert 80% of its young people into orchestral musicians has a revolutionary impact. Everything improves, and we have the stories to prove it, but we're not relying on them alone. The Glasgow Centre for Population Health, in association with Audit Scotland and Caledonian University, has begun a programme to evaluate the long-term impact of our work in Raploch and Govan Hill. The researchers are looking for examples of similar programmes that have been subject to long-term evaluation. The closest so far seems to be an American initiative, High Scope Perry, started in the 1970s, that demonstrated a 13-fold return on early years preventative spend. My mantra is that we have to spend thousands to save millions, and we're beginning to prove that claim. Given the opportunity, Systema Scotland has the potential to transform dozens, if not hundreds, of communities across Scotland, but we can only do it one at a time. And the argument I encounter when I put this to city officials is that, well, you can't just open there, because over there would be offended by that. And I say to them, you can only do everything one at a time. You can't do everything all at once, but if you do it seriously and patiently, you will transform the whole community. And I would love the City of Edinburgh to enter into a partnership with us to open a big noise orchestra in one of its deprived communities and join our revolution of joy. It would then become part of an international movement of cities throughout the world who have realized that something new has to be tried if we're not to go on rerunning old tragedies and paying for them. Our work over the last 6 years has already cemented a host of international connections. Stirling has had visitors from every continent except Antarctica, and we're waiting for that. We've 2 formal partnerships mentoring emerging Systema movements in New Zealand and South Korea, and we've many more informal ones. The Scottish Government's early evaluation of our work has proved to be influential globally, if not necessarily in our own country enough, and more politicians and their officials from abroad are making pilgrimages to Raploch to find out how to do it. And here's a wee story that proves something. When we began establishing different subgroups within Big Noise Raploch, Big Noise is what the kids asked us to call the orchestra. So we used it. It was the big trip. It's the big noise. And we have a program for babies because we get them as soon as the umbilical cord is cut. And it's called Baby Noise. In order to accommodate the different musical stages of the children, we decided to call our top ensemble the Rinconada Orchestra, in honor of a Systema Centre in Caracas that's been a particular inspiration to us. And guess what? We were thrilled to hear that in New Zealand, they have named their elite group the Raploch Orchestra, a move that caused even more rejoicing in Raploch. This October, we're organising an ambitious international Systema Teachers Conference that will bring 150 practitioners from across the world to Scotland. Our aim is to establish Stirling as a world-class centre of excellence for sharing the Systema philosophy and practice. Apart from our own core interest in transforming deprived Scottish communities, these international connections could be the conduit for developing a new kind of cultural diplomacy between Scotland and the rest of the world. And I believe Edinburgh, with all its international connections, should be at the forefront of that cause. So let me leave my invitation there on the table for this great city to accept or to decline. But here's a final thought. I live near some busy primary schools in Edinburgh, and when I go for my paper in the morning, I see parents taking their children to school. The parents trudge along, head down, but the children skip. They skip because they're natural artists who turn the need to walk from one place to another into a dance. And too many of our children, that instinct to play has been suppressed by the weight of poverty. But with daring and imagination, we can start them dancing. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we got all the children of this grey, beautiful old city skipping again? Thank you.
So many things in there. Fantastic, Richard. Got me going in all sorts of ways. But as I say, who would like to pick one right up the back there? Formulate some thoughts and questions. Oh, support. We like to hear. Yes, we'll do this with you, Richard, or whatever. So.
Hi there. You talked about the excluded and taking away barriers to the excluded coming back into society. How do we get the message across to the excluded that the barriers are being taken away and give them a confidence to take part? Because there's a two-way process there.
I think partly by including them. I think too often social policy has been done unto them rather than involving them, and the whole kind of community organisation movement is turning that upside down. We're very careful before we go into a neighbourhood to start a big noise orchestra that we're not thought of as parachuting into their midst. We operate in a way that gains their consent, their invitation, so that we become part of the fabric of their community and not just another thing that's being done to them. But you put your finger on something that's fundamentally important about the empowering of people. You have to enable them to take power themselves. But in too many of those communities, even that's been squeezed out of them. But thanks for that very important point. But I think this does that. It empowers the parents. We've ended up in Raploch with a parents' orchestra called inevitably The Noise. And it's brought in retired people who lived rather excluded lives. There's a beautiful testimony from one wee woman in one of our films that says that. She never went out. She didn't think anyone had any use for her. She started volunteering for us. And now she's playing, I think, the cello in The Noise, and she's come alive. I think it's part, and this is not the only way to do that, but you have to enable them to be part of the thing that's going to change things for the better.
And on this side?
What legacy do you expect from Glasgow 2014?
A lot of athletic resources, places you can cycle bikes around and run around. I don't want to knock it because I think it's brought quite a bit of joy and energy in. They've knocked a lot of houses down to put up athletes' accommodation that will then be converted into houses. So I think it'll be mixed, just as I think that what's left in East London from the Olympics is mixed. I think it's another one of these big splashy things that we tend to find billions of pounds to do, when I would quite like to siphon off maybe even 1% of that to do some less splashy things that will be humanly more enduring. But I hope that there is an enduring legacy and it's more than just a kind of a new trampolining auditorium.
I'm just wondering whether there's a thought or an idea behind that question.
The amount of money you identify is obviously going out of the public purse to support these. And I would have thought you would be saying, don't do it at all, because we can make much better use of the money.
Yeah. Well, it's too late anyway. I have to be a bit political about this stuff. I don't want to piss off the people that might actually help us do some good stuff as well. When the children of Israel left Egypt, they despoiled the Egyptians of their jewelry, and I think that that's quite a good metaphor for the kind of thing that we have to do. You have to keep in with the people who might actually help you to do some good, and they also have their problems. Incidentally, our kids will be playing at the opening.
There's so much in your talk that it's difficult to sort of know where to go. But as you were saying, you'd like to see the children skipping, and you've picked up again saying that the elderly are involved as well. I'd like to see everybody skipping in Edinburgh. And I thought you were very generous with the politicians, and again, you've just explained why. I look at things like the housing issue that you picked on. I'm director of the Coburn Association, so housing and space is particularly important to us. And I feel that we could do so much more instead of allowing exceptions of the 25% affordable housing and putting it all in one place, as you say, at the outskirts. I see more and more people having to move out of Edinburgh because they can't afford to live here. The other question I'd put to you is the definition of poverty itself. We start to think that we're in poverty if we can't afford to do things. And I see people with a lot of money who are still in poverty because they don't go out and do anything, because they don't know what to do, and then it comes to the time factor. It's such a huge thing. Edinburgh's such a fantastic city, and we've got so much to do. I love the idea of what you're doing at the moment. I was conscious of it about 6 years ago when you started, and I thought, oh, that's something for Edinburgh. Not everybody has a musical vent. What else might we do?
Many skipping, but I mean, I'm told that everyone has a musical bent, actually. If you catch children young enough, I'm not a musician myself. I used to play the recorder, and I can do a kind of fuzzy thing with the bagpipes doing that. But I'm told by our musicians that the best thing about the orchestra is that it will accommodate every range of talent, from the kind of kids we've discovered in Raploch who have rare musical ability that would not have been discovered 6 years ago, to the ones that are good enough and get by. And I think that there's something about this particular method, this instrumentality, that has unique power. But of course, it could be any number of things. I don't know. People sometimes say, well, wouldn't sport work? I don't think it would, because to be in a football team, you have to be reasonably good at it. You can't accommodate as many duds in a football team as you can in an orchestra. And nor can you in a ballet company. I mean, I wouldn't last a day in a ballet company. So maybe you can come up with something else that is as inclusive as this. This is the one we've discovered, and it does work. It doesn't exclude other possibilities. But I've seen what it's done in Venezuela. I'm seeing what it's doing here. And I'm glad, for instance, Aberdeen has been watching it very closely. And Aberdeen spent about 3 years looking at us and coming down because they've got problem areas. And after 3 solid years of meticulous planning, they came to a universal conclusion, cross-party, all the officials in the council. They wanted a big noise in Tory, and they're going to help us fund it by getting bits of money from every conceivable portfolio in the city system. That's the way it has to work. You don't get it out of culture spend. You get it from housing. You get it from health. You get it from education. You get it from criminal justice. You get it from various other kinds of funds, such as the fund the Scottish Government have that it takes off criminals, the proceeds of crime. That'd be a lovely way to recycle all that kind of money, because a lot of that money comes from some of these very poor areas. So I'm not saying this is the only trick in the box, but it's my trick at the moment, and I'm playing it as strongly as I can. And I do hope Edinburgh will listen. There aren't any officials or politicians here tonight, of course.
Richard, can
One City Trust students.
So can I just ask you, because you reeled off a number of kind of public sector sources of money there. What's happening in terms of private sector or grant-making trust?
When we started this, we started it 7 years ago, and we decided we would try and start it in Raploch, because it's bang in the centre of Scotland. It was undergoing an enormous regeneration process of the sort that I've seen happening throughout my life in Scotland. You spend billions doing up the houses, the roads, the schools, and in 10 years, back again. They've got a lot of European money. They were doing it quite imaginatively. They built an enormous community campus with three primary schools in it. I went to Stirling Council and said, would you let us come in and regenerate, as it were, the inner infrastructure, the spiritual, cultural infrastructure, take a punt on us. We won't ask any money from you. We'll pay for this for 5 years. If you will give us a place to work out of and access to the children in these schools, and because we want to see if this will work in Scotland. It may not. It may be a purely South American thing. And they very bravely said okay, and they got cross-party support, because you need that, because once you start working with children, you do not forsake them. And so you need that long-term commitment, and we got it from them. And the deal was that we would pay for it totally for 5 years. If it proved it was working and the community was being turned around, they would meet 75% of it. And that's what they're now seeking to raise. And we've been very successful at raising money from wealthy individuals and from trusts, because there are a lot of good people out there that want change, that say this is impossible to keep this going. To be pouring billions into this kind of maintaining of a terrible system of endemic poverty. And there are people prepared to take a chance on us. So we've actually been very good at raising money. And when we open in Aberdeen, however, we will open with the understanding that they will from the beginning meet 75. We will help them, because we're actually quite good at doing this. We will help them raise money from wealthy individuals, a lot of oil money up there. But it's a question of getting the community onto it and up for it. And then the money comes, because this is something that's transformative. The politicians get worried because they think it's all going to come from one budget. But if you say to them, if you take bits out of 6 budgets, you don't have to take very much out of any of them. And that's what Aberdeen is doing. We've got other councils queuing up, because Sundral is looking at us, because that's a place that needs a jolt of creative joy and energy. But I think it would be tragic if we never ever get a big noise centre in Edinburgh.
Hi.
Well, petition your leaders.
So a question really about the long-term strategy, really. So I can foresee that the more big noise orchestras you open, kind of the less special they become. So Raploch's had a fantastic enduring legacy. Mm-hmm. And because of that, all the pride and regeneration within that particular location. How do you ensure that continues with every new big noise orchestra that gets opened?
Because there are 250 in Venezuela. 2 million children have gone through it in Venezuela. It just gets better. I mean, just think of the angles. You would need a whole-scale music instrument-making industry to keep it going. So it might actually play into people who wanted to invest in something beautiful like making cellos and violins and double basses. Not to mention all the brass stuff. And I think that you could get Scotland as a nation that simply was known for music, including bagpipes, because we even do bagpipes. The clincher to the concert in Caracas in January, one of our wonderful music teachers arranged a number of Scottish folk songs, and he put in a few quotes from Mahler in the piece there, which the very, very musically educated Venezuelans got. You could see them kind of smiling and it ended with a bit from that famous modern Scottish pop song. There was a soldier, a Scottish soldier, and we got a wee boy to play that on the pipes. And he was off stage, and when that bit of the Miscellany came up, Jacob marched on playing the pipes, and the whole Venezuelan audience erupted into a standing ovation. They were so thrilled with it. So even that comes in. This touches everything. And I think that it would energize the whole... Not every kid will become a professional musician. We will create some world-class orchestras. I've no doubt about that at all. We've already identified at least half a dozen children who will undoubtedly make professional musicians out of themselves. And these are young kids who are in it from the very beginning. We've got kids who've been doing it now for 5 or 6 years, and they're beginning to mentor the others. It will simply spread a kind of joy and a kind of purpose. And one of the points I've been making all night tonight is that what we need to do in endowing our children is to give them resilience to live no matter what the market throws at them. And it's a cruel world. And there are going to be constant changes, but if you give them somehow the inner resources to cope, so that even if they are unemployed, they will have the capacity to deal. They will be enlarged human beings by it, and it will probably give them the energy to make arrangements and to invent new ways of responding to all of that. I think the sky's the limit on this. I mean, I'm an old man now, but I'd like to see at least 10 big noise orchestras in Scotland before I snuff it, and I've got the date.
Thank you. I think probably a final quick question down here, and maybe ask for a quick answer to it. Thank you.
Thank you for an excellent lecture. There's an awful lot in it to think about. You mentioned the honesty of the Edinburgh leaders. To some extent, maybe, but most recently, when there was that awful accident in a school where a young girl died, you have to wonder about priorities and honesty. If money can be found for some of the projects, which probably we all know about, and yet day by day and month by month, our schools, for the very young people that you're talking about, do not appear to be maintained. So I think I applaud everything you're doing in the big noise, and will you please tell us how we can donate to it. But I think there are some aspects of priorities in politics locally which really need to be looked at.
Yeah, no, I entirely agree with that. The one thing I will say, however, is we've created a kind of society that gets very suspicious when any tragedy happens, and someone has immediately to be blamed. Now, there was a wall that fell down, and it may be that the report will prove that there has been fault somewhere, but not every tragedy is capable of that kind of logical analysis. Bad things happen, terrible things happen, and I think we've created a kind of society in which we tend to scapegoat. When terrible things happen to children, we scapegoat social workers terribly. I mean, it's become a terribly stressful profession for that reason, because we've somehow created this kind of inability to recognize that life is pretty tragic for a lot of people, and tragic things happen. So I think that I don't know the details of that particular thing. When I said that the politicians were honest, I think they're honest about the fact that Edinburgh is a divided city with too many poor people. I think that they probably need more imaginative ways of responding to it. But the fact that the statistics I gave you tonight were supplied by the city.
I'm sorry, I'm not going to let you come back, because then he'd have to come back to you. Thank you.